After tennis star Maria Sharapova admitted she tested positive during a drug test for the Australian Open, sponsors began backing away almost immediately. Nike and Porsche also announced they'd suspend or end ties with the athlete, who's one of the highest paid female athletes in the world. Will she be able to redeem herself with sponsors? Is she going to be able to come back? Joining us now on the KOGO News Live line, San Diego State University marketing professor Dr. George Belch. Hard to imagine anymore that athletes think they can get away with doing drugs with all the testing that goes on, but we have Maria Sharapova admitting she tested positive. So what happens to her career from here on out?
Well, I think it's very difficult to say where this goes. It's really going to depend on what kind of ruling is handed down. The expectations are that this could be anywhere from a 1-year ban to as much as a 4-year ban. And if it's a 4-year ban, I think given her age and the competition at that level, that it could be the end of her career.
And sponsors don't want anything to do with somebody who's caught.
Sponsors really have to very quickly make a move today. There have just been too many situations where athletes have, been accused of using performance-enhancing drugs. There have been many other situations, and the companies just have to make a move and quickly distance themselves from that, because if not, they risk the backlash from the public, who's going to question why they continue to support them.
Is there any hangover from that? Do they face problems if they don't move quickly enough?
Well, that's always a big unknown, but if you look, for example, in the case of Sharapova, one of her big sponsors, one of her biggest contracts is with Nike. Let's back up through the last several years. Nike had the problems associated with Tiger Woods. Then they stood by Lance Armstrong for many years, and that particularly was embarrassing for them, I think, because they were such a ardent supporter of Armstrong. They had Oscar Pistorius in South Africa, who ended up being accused of and actually convicted of a murder charge. You've had many situations with Nike in particular, and that's partly because they have so many endorsers under contract, that I think these companies just have to say, we can't afford to see what the backlash from the public might be.
I know Nike, for example, spends hundreds of millions of dollars on multiple endorsements in multiple sports, and they certainly are a brand to be reckoned with. But I'm curious if these kind of endorsements really have that great an effect on the public that buys the shoes.
I think in many ways they do. These companies are pretty smart, and they wouldn't be spending the hundreds of millions of dollars that they do if they didn't think it had some impact. Particularly in sports like tennis, basketball, where the athlete wearing the brand and the performance of the athlete might be related to the brand. That's a situation where I think the marketers are very likely to see some impact, particularly for a high-profile athlete like Sharapova.
Now, if Sharapova faces maybe the worst type of suspension and she's out for a while, can she redeem herself not only in the eyes of the public with her brand, but with her sponsors?
It's going to be difficult for her, and I think a lot of this is going to depend on what kind of action the World Tennis Association takes against her. If they buy into her argument that, well, this was just an honest mistake, I'd been taking the substance for years, and it was just an honest mistake, then there might be some forgiveness. I mean, if you really look at what's going on, at least in the case of Nike, they haven't completely severed ties with her yet. They more or less put her on the back burner, and they're saying we're going to wait to see how this works out. I think in the case of Tag Heuer, they move more quickly. It's really going to depend, I think, on what type of ruling comes down, and they'll gauge the sentiment involved around her. She's a great spokesperson. I mean, she has physical attributes. I mean, she's a great competitor. She's won. She's conducted herself very, very well. That's why I think this has taken everyone for such a surprise. But even that said, the marketers have to be very careful about continuing to use someone who has this hanging over their head.
Yeah, it's interesting the difference between the sports. Baseball, for example, I think you get 3 tries at failing a drug test before anything really serious happens to you. And in tennis, it seems like you get 1 strike and you're out.
That seems to be the case, although, what's interesting about this is that she's more or less saying, well, I didn't open an email, and the email was a message saying that the substance was banned as of January 1st, 2016. On the other hand, people like Sharapova have a team of people around them. I mean, when you're talking about competing for millions of dollars, when you have $30 million a year in endorsement deals, you have to have people around you who are very cognizant of this. And if you listen to what some of the other players are saying. They're more or less saying, look, we get 2 and 3 warnings a week about these things. And so the argument for her to just say, well, I overlooked it, it was as simple as me not opening an email, I think that's going to be hard for the Tennis Association or for anybody else to buy into that explanation.
Dr. George Belch with San Diego State University marketing professor.